comply with the laws as they exist in Georgia. Since you knew we were going to use the laws of Georgia, what I'm going to do is follow the law as it is set out in the state of Georgia, at least as I knew it when I woke up this morning. Therefore, you will be able to utilize the time that the state of Georgia has allowed. And I believe, let me check with my staff attorney. Now, she has advised me there's still an hour. Therefore, you will have 1 hour each. Now, to benefit the lawyers, your hour will not actually start until you actually say your first word. Any pauses or breaks actually count on that time. Therefore, you can use the time, use exhibits as you deem appropriate, but once you say your first word, I will record the time. Once an hour, if you reach an hour, has exhausted, which means 60 minutes, you will be instructed to stop. And I will say, stop. And I expect to hear silence at that point in time, if needed. Any questions from the state?
No, sir.
From the defense?
No, sir, none whatsoever.
All right. At this point in time, all lawyers are present. The state has the opportunity to open and conclude. Is the state going to use the opening argument or just reserve?
The state is going to reserve its opening argument for rebuttal, Your Honor.
All right. Therefore, Mr. Clegg, when the jury is seated, we will begin the process. Is the defense ready?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you. Deputy Garrett, if you would assist me in bringing in the jurors, please.
Thank you. Yeah, I might place this.
Yes, sir.
For Mr. Clegg, is this okay for the floor?
I like to be able to see the faces of the jurors so that it's my responsibility to make sure they're alert and attentive. If you could put that in the corner, because no one's going to be in the witness chair, and you can move about, but I just like to be able to see their faces.
So
since I
this
do have
would be okay then?
That is perfect, Mr.
Okay.
Petrie, as always. Thank you for your assistance, and thank you, Mr. Williams. Thank you, sir. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in any seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in any seat. Ladies and gentlemen, come on in, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in any seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat. And if you need additional notepads and or pencils, let Deputy Garrett know or myself, and we'll make sure we provide those to lawyers and parties. You may be seated. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're at the portion of the trial where the presentation of evidence has concluded. We're at the portion of the state and the defense will have an opportunity to come before you and give you an argument on what they feel the case has been presented to this point. Since the state has the burden of proving each and every material element beyond a reasonable doubt, they legally have the right to what's called open and conclude the argument. They can go first, the defense will be there, and then followed by the state again. Prior to you coming in, the state has indicated they're going to waive their introductory remarks and reserve their concluding remarks. All right? So once I stop speaking, the next person you will hear from will be a representative from the defense, and I've been informed it will be Mr. Thomas Clegg, who will come to you and give you closing arguments. By law, they have a finite period of time that they will be allowed to argue, and they are aware of that. I will not discuss that at this point in time unless it becomes an issue at the appropriate time. So at this point in time, and people will be coming and going, but don't let that be a distraction, because all of this is very important. I want you to listen to each and every word that is being said, just as you have been very attentive up to this point. Because I still need you to keep an open mind until everything has concluded, until you have to make a decision. At this point in time, once this young lady, well, maybe I was going to let her be seated, but that's fine. Somebody, you need something to write with, young man? What do you need, pencil? Because once the lawyers start, I just want you to focus on him. So if anybody needs pencil or pad, we have plenty, and I want to give those to you now. All right. If you have a pencil, if you're ready, everybody give me a thumbs up if you're ready to go. All right, everybody's good. We got hand signals are good. Excellent, excellent. All right, at this point in time, Mr. Clegg, you may proceed, sir.
Thank you, sir. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I have appreciated the fact that you have been here for an extended period of time. As you are probably aware, most trials don't last this long, and you have paid very close attention during the course of the proceedings, and for that I believe both parties are extremely appreciative, and thank you. Now, let me start with this. You folks are, when this case is over, when you go into the jury room after the arguments have been made and when the charge of the court has been given, you will be called upon to deliberate and reach a verdict. I'm asking you, during the course of that deliberation, be very analytical. Here's what I mean. The state of Georgia has brought an indictment that contains 13 different counts. Each of those particular counts contains a number of elements that they have to prove to your satisfaction beyond a reasonable doubt. When you get into the jury room, you need to use your analytical skills and powers in the course of your deliberations to determine whether or not the state of Georgia, in bringing these charges, has actually succeeded in proving them, again, to your satisfaction beyond a reasonable doubt. We are now in, as a practical matter, jointly our 9th day together. We had time together prior in the week before during the course of jury selection. So we are approaching 3 weeks. Who's fooling who? You folks have had to sit here and listen to us for 3 weeks, and I'm sure at some point during the course of the proceedings you have picked up on certain quirks or personality habits that we have. That may annoy you. That may irritate you. You may decide, based on what I have seen, I do not like one side or the other. Miss Cross, for example, who is a very charming young lady, has a unique habit of when she's asking questions of witnesses, when she gets an answer, she checks it off with a flourish. I'm not suggesting that that is anything wrong with that, but that is a particular habit that she has, and I'm sure we have habits like that as well. When you go into the jury room to deliberate, ixnay on thinking about the habits. You are here for one purpose and one purpose alone. Use your analytical skills and determine whether these folks have determined to your satisfaction that this woman is guilty of each and every crime that she is charged with beyond a reasonable doubt. Make no mistake, when you deliberate, you will have to reach that decision as to every material element of every count. There is not one single question that you can resolve when you go in there and say, is she guilty or not guilty? You've got to look at the charges, you've got to evaluate the charges, and you've got to determine whether the state of Georgia has in fact been successful in carrying forth the allegations that it made against this woman. Now, they have to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. What does that mean? It means you can't rely on a hunch. You can't rely on a feeling. You can't rely on a guess. You have to be satisfied in your own minds, again, as to each material allegation of each count that the defendant is guilty. It's not a feeling that it might have happened. It's not even, it probably may have happened. It's, you know. Now, do you know to a mathematical certainty? No, you cannot know that. The law does not require you to make that determination to a mathematical certainty, but nonetheless, use your common sense, use your analytical skills when you get into the jury room, decide what is a reasonable doubt and how should it apply. Because we're in a criminal context here, folks. This is not a civil case. This woman could be convicted and branded a criminal if she is convicted. You don't do that unless you're pretty darn sure of what you're doing. Complicating the fact is this is a circumstantial evidence case. Now, I don't usually use notes. I don't usually try cases with 7 other attorneys in a courtroom. But I have been prevailed upon to go ahead and use a PowerPoint performance during the course of this argument. Who knows how it's going to work? Let's take a look at the first slide. Circumstantial evidence. To warrant a conviction on circumstantial evidence, the proven fact shall not only be consistent with the hypothesis of guilt, but exclude every other reasonable hypothesis save that of the guilt of the accused. Make no mistake, folks, we have a circumstantial case here. A circumstantial case is not a situation. Here's a direct evidence case. It's an armed robbery. It's a convenience store armed robbery. The witness comes in, who's the victim of the armed robbery. He says, there he is, that's the man who robbed me. That's a direct evidence case. We have direct evidence actually pointing to the guilt. Circumstantial evidence is not that kind of evidence. Circumstantial evidence is evidence that asks you to draw a conclusion, make an inference, and based on that inference, convict an individual. That's what we got here. That's why, again, look at that instruction. It shall exclude every other reasonable hypothesis save that of the guilt of the accused. That's the framework you folks are operating in this case. You have to find the defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and then you have to evaluate it using circumstantial evidence, Quite frankly, there is only one count where circumstantial evidence does not actually apply, and then determine whether or not the state has proven this woman's guilt to your satisfaction. What is it exactly they're contending? You know, you've been sitting here for almost 2 weeks. At this point, they are contending that Andrea Sneiderman willfully and knowingly somehow impeded the investigation into the death of her husband in order to try to cover up or prevent the police from determining that the perpetrator of the crime was Hemi Newman. And they are further contending that she had had what they describe as either a romantic relationship or a romantic involvement with Mr. Newman, and that may have been the rationale and reason for her so doing. She ain't charged with murder. You know that. You sat here for almost 2 weeks now. I told you that in opening. This is not a murder case. She is charged with the crimes you have heard read in the indictment. But nonetheless, you know what the underlying allegations are, and you know what the underlying contentions of the state of Georgia is. You know what it is they're contending. Now, how is it that they're trying to prove that? And that's one of the things that makes this case interesting. They have presented a well-edited TV show for your consideration. You saw a lot of clips, not the entirety of Andrea Sneiderman's testimony from the Hemi Newman trial. You have seen some emails over and over and over again. You have heard the state's prosecutor stand up and cross-examine witnesses and say, "Did you know that she was having an affair?" as if that were an established fact. And they continue to try to present, and it's really well done, I'll give them credit, a manipulating, quite frankly, edited TV show to convince you that that woman committed a crime. Now, they did have a couple of real live eyewitnesses, didn't they? Not eyewitnesses, but actual people come into court who mattered. I think they had 3 who, when you get down to, really mattered. Christine Oliveira, the waitress in Greenville. Trying to think of they had the testimony of Melanie White, who wasn't actually a witness as to anything herself. They had Don Sneiderman, and they had Shayna Citron. That's who they actually had as a practical matter for witnesses for you to consider whether or not this woman is guilty of the crime she is charged with. They had the TV show. They repeated those scenes over and over when it was to their advantage, and then they had those 3 people. Melanie White is added on. And the thing about Melanie White is, again, remember her testimony. She said, "I don't know this woman. I have absolutely no knowledge of this woman. I have never met this woman. I have never spoken to this woman. But Hemi Newman has told me all about her." Think about that for a second. Hemi Newman. You got to see a little bit of a clip of Hemi Newman during the course of this trial. 12, 13 minutes or so when he was being interviewed by Sergeant Cordellino. Hemi Newman was charged with the murder and convicted of the murder of Rusty Sneiderman. You will have, when you deliberate, documents in your possession to review concerning that particular case. You will have a copy of the indictment in that trial where Hemi Newman's lawyers and Hemi Newman entered a plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. You will have a document that was prepared by Hemi Newman's attorneys that indicated that he was raising the defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. You will have a copy of a jury verdict where he was found guilty but mentally ill. You will have a copy of his sentence where he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. All of that took place in February and March of 2012. All of that took place before that woman was arrested and before that woman was charged with any crime whatsoever. Knowing that the guy's doing life without parole, knowing that the issue at his trial was his sanity, you should ask yourself a really very simple question. What on earth are we doing here? Seriously, think about this. This woman is charged with a number of crimes in which she is alleged to have somehow impeded an investigation into a man who was subsequently convicted after a trial where the issue at the trial was his state of mind at the time he committed the crime. That's all resolved before the criminal justice system begins any sort of proceedings against her. But you're now being asked to sit in judgment somehow because the state of Georgia contends that she somehow impeded the investigation. In that context, what are we doing here? Ask yourself this. Did she provide the name of Hemi Newman to the police within 36 hours of the death of her husband? Darn right she did. The state of Georgia will contend that how she provided it was somehow flawed, but you heard it. You've heard it a couple of times. Dandy Thompson asks a question and says, is there anybody trying to break up your marriage or doing anything inappropriate? And the answer is instantaneous. Andrea Sneiderman immediately goes, yes. November the 24th, she talks again to Andy Thompson. Andy Thompson comes up with some more questions. Tedious interview. Gosh, it was tedious. What, 3 hours of a lot of nothing? Maybe 12 to 13 minutes of it that mattered. But the bottom line is, again, the subject comes up, Andrea Sneiderman answers questions, and then Thompson moves on to something else. January the 4th, Andrea Sneiderman, on her own, with her rabbi and with family members, shows up at the Dunwoody Police Department and says, what's going on with the investigation? Nobody is telling her what's going on. And lo and behold, during the course of that particular meeting, according to David Sides, who was there, and according to Rabbi Minkowitz, who was there, Andrea Sneiderman says, have you focused on this individual? I tried to reach him on the morning of the 18th. That individual is Hemi Newman. What did you do about it? She became animated, according to Rabbi Minkowitz during the course of that meeting. January 5th, she's interviewed again. She provides more information on her own. She is trying to keep the case alive in the press, trying to find out who on earth is it that killed her husband. And then when it comes time to go to trial, she testifies and she is asked, is this guy delusional, Hemi Newman, the defendant sitting here in the courtroom? Not a chance. That's the woman who the state of Georgia is contending is somehow impeding this investigation. Here's the thought. Can I prove it for sure? No. Will you have to use your own abilities of conjecture and the ability to draw conclusions to determine the validity of it? Absolutely. But here's the thought. On November 19th, Andrea Sneiderman gives the name of Hemi Newman to the Dunwoody Police Department. Think about this for a second. You saw Gary Cordellino testify in this courtroom. Gary Cordellino was there. Gary Cordellino testified that if that was said, he either didn't hear it or was out of the room. Because Gary Cordellino said when they brought Hemi Newman in for questioning on January the 4th that he wasn't really even a suspect. Now at that time they had linked a car to Hemi Newman. We know that. It was the identical kind of car. Could you say it was the same car? No. But obviously, the guy is a suspect. Think about this as well. Mrs. Sneiderman comes in for the interview on the 4th, not for the interview, the meeting. She gives them a couple names, and then all of a sudden she says, and what about Hemi Newman? And Chief Grogan, according to Rabbi Minkowitz, during the course of that meeting, when that subject is brought up, all of a sudden starts writing stuff down. Andy Thompson, the chief investigator, has been pursuing other matters. Andy Thompson has been pursuing Rusty's business interests during the course of the investigation. He testified that himself. During the course of the interview on November the 19th, Andrea Sneiderman said, don't waste your time with that. But by gosh, he's doing that. Is it possible that the Dunwoody Police Department, in the course of their investigation, after having linked up someone by the name of Hemi Newman to a car, honestly did not know that Andrea Sneiderman had already given them that information. Think about this for a second. That's what happened. That's why they are so embarrassed when they come into court. That's why they are so incapable of answering questions about the chronology of when it is that they took Andrea Sneiderman's name and connected it up with Hemi Newman. That's why they are trying to explain why they actually did a good job to get out from under the fact that they should have an extraordinary amount of egg on their face. They blew it, folks. They blew it totally. They blew it completely. And now, to try to save face, they come before you and they tell you that it's Andrea Sneiderman's fault that we didn't solve the case quicker. It is Andrea Sneiderman's fault because she didn't tell us all of the details concerning Hemi Newman's infatuation with her. You heard the interview on the 19th? Remember what Thompson asked? Anybody interested? Yes, my boss. What's his name? Hemi Newman. How old is he? 46? Interesting, by the way, isn't it? She's having an affair with a guy. She doesn't even know his age. He's 48. Also interesting, oh, he's 40, he's in his 40s, that's great. What kind of hair does he have? Salt and pepper. Well, that's fascinating. Let's move on to something else. That's the Dunwoody Police Department. Andrea Sneiderman gives them Hemi Newman on a silver platter. That's not good enough because they can't be bothered to ask follow-up questions. The only reason the conversation, the discussion continues is because Bonnie Greenberg, Andrea's mother, pretty much forces the issue. That's what we got. Now, it's great, isn't it, Thompson? Thompson basically says, I didn't bother to follow up because Andrea just said nothing happened. That was one day. He comes back the next morning and he goes, oh, no. That's not what we got. Actually, I'm a crafty detective. I realized she would have been embarrassed in the presence of everyone else in her family, so I was going to wait till I had her alone and then ask her about that topic. You saw the interview on the 24th. There was a reason why you had to watch it in its entirety. What did Thompson do? And more importantly, what did Thompson not do? That interview droned on forever, and the subject was never brought up about Hemi Newman, was it? And, go back to my theory, they forgot. During the course of that interview, Andy Thompson, after asking Andrea Sneiderman, are you into threesomes? Is Rusty into threesomes? Bisexuality? You name it. All of a sudden says, by the way, let's talk about your boss. During the course of that interview, during that period of time when they're talking about the boss, he never mentions Hemi Newman's name. Did they forget? Did they not follow through? Is it her fault that she didn't solve the crime for them? I mean, the bottom line is, you didn't tell us that he did it. Well, did you bother to ask? These are cops. That's what they're supposed to do. Did they bother to ask? And if they didn't bother to ask, are you going to find this woman guilty of a crime? Here's the bottom line, folks. During the course of that interview on the 24th, Andrea Sneiderman talking about Hemi, and she uses his name once or twice. Hemi, not Hemi Newman, but Hemi. Thompson never does. Basically says, he's my friend. I can't imagine he could do this, but the bottom line is, that's for you to decide. Did they follow through? Did they make any attempt to follow through whatsoever? And because they didn't, it's her fault that it took them a while to connect the dots. But the bottom line is, and I would submit, the reason we're here is pure and simple. Andrea Sneiderman is on trial today because the bottom line is, when it came down to it, she didn't initially believe that Hemi Newman did it. Just like Melanie White. You saw her testify in his courtroom. Melanie White describes Hemi Newman's relations, or his description of his relations with the defendant. She knows who all the players are. She knows that Rusty is dead. I asked her, did you go to the cops? Her answer is, cops? Why would I go to the cops? He wouldn't kill anybody. What's good for Melanie White apparently is not good enough for Andrea Sneiderman. So she sits here today, charged with these crimes, because the Dunwoody cops couldn't be bothered to get off their butts, know what one hand and the other hand was doing, and do a reasonably competent job investigating this case. Let's talk. 13 counts. I have a finite period of time, as the judge had noted. So let's talk about some of the particular charges. Hindering the apprehension of a criminal. Read the indictment when you get in there. Read the actual charging language of the indictment, because the indictment will tell you what you have to find her guilty. The key part, at the time of the concealment and destruction of the evidence, she knew it was evidence of the crime of murder. Now, look at the next page. First off, destroyed text messages and phone records. Think about this for a second, folks. There are text messages that apparently have been deleted. The exact method of their deletion, we do not know. The exact content of those text messages, we do not know. There have been text messages from Hemi Newman deleted. There have been text messages from all sorts of people deleted. We know that Andrea Sneiderman is apparently one of the champion texters of the world, from the testimony of Mr. Broom this morning. Okay, think about it in this context. In order to prove that particular allegation of this count, they have to show that those text messages were evidence of the crime of murder. You can't do that if you don't have the actual text messages. You could, I suppose, draw an inference, but you can't do it unless you actually know what's contained therein. They brought that charge despite the fact that their own expert says, I have no idea what the content of those particular text messages was. Is that right? We can't prove a case, but we're going to make the allegation nonetheless. We have no good faith basis for going forward with the prosecution of this particular allegation, but by gosh, we're going to make it nonetheless. Is that really right? Come on. Somehow, what else? She concealed a romantic relationship. The judge is going to tell you silence is not an affirmative act. Whether she had a relationship or not, and she did not. Quite frankly, the fact that she didn't own up to it does not constitute a crime. This is the United States of America. If you don't tell something to the cops and they haven't bothered to ask, and boy did they not ever, you can't charge somebody with a crime. Concealed any knowledge of Hemi Newman's culpability in the murder of Russell Sneiderman. Where on earth did that come from? Is there any evidence in the course of this trial supporting that particular allegation? She knew that he had committed a murder, and she couldn't be bothered to tell the cops. They've made that allegation collectively amongst yourselves, go into the jury room, deliberate, and ask, what on earth is it they have in support of that allegation? The answer is zip, nada, nothing. Count two. This is a chart that has been prepared. I don't do charts, folks, but somebody prepared it, by God, and it gives you a pretty good idea of the burden of proof. It gives you a pretty good idea as to the burden of proof in a criminal case. If they didn't do it, you sure as heck don't find them guilty. If they probably didn't do it, you sure as heck don't find them guilty. If they maybe did it, you sure as heck don't find them not guilty or guilty. You got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. There is an entire continuum that you folks have to evaluate, and there is one possibility, and that is they have proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. Count two. Concealment of a material fact. She covered up a romantic relationship. Again, presuming that there was such a relationship, what legal obligation does she have to disclose it unless somebody asks and she says it didn't happen? Again, this is the U.S. You can't do that. But while we're at it, let's talk about the evidence of whether there was, in fact, a romantic relationship. Because when you get down to it, that's why, really, we're here, isn't it? You've got some emails You've got some records from Longmont, Colorado, which show nothing. You got some phone records that don't show much of anything. And you got, honest to goodness, folks, Shayna Citron. Okay, the emails. The emails, for the most part, are from Hemi Newman to her, documenting the degree of infatuation that he has with her. You have seen nothing during the course of this trial where Andrea Sneiderman says, love you too, miss you too, want to get together with you, anything of the sort. The state of Georgia would have you believed at some point they hopped in the sack together. Whether it was in Longmont, Colorado, whether it was in Greenville, South Carolina, whether it was in London, England. Is there anything in the emails to reflect that from Andrea Sneiderman? There is something, apparently, from Hemi Newman. Hemi Newman, who, by his own admission, when he talks to Cordellino, says, maybe I was just imagining things. Hemi Newman, who asserted a defense of not guilty by reason of insanity. Hemi Newman, who was found to be, by a jury of his peers, mentally ill. Hemi Newman says that. But is there anything from Andrea Sneiderman to support that inference? They talk about the chocolate and flowers. No evidence of chocolate and flowers. If you listen or look carefully at the emails, he sent her a picture of some flowers. Boy, he is the last great romantic, isn't he? He's patting his own back. I'm the last great romantic, aren't I? Her response is, blah, 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 romantic for sure. That's it. We got her. We got her, by gosh. She was in a romantic relationship in response to something that Hemi Newman said, her boss. She said, romantic for sure. She told her mom and 3 of her friends about the guy's advances. If you're going to have an affair, and let's cut to the chase. Romantic involvement, romantic relationship. Give us a break. If you're going to have an affair, do you tell your mother and do you tell your friends that you have been harassed by this individual? You might, if you're thinking you're going to get in bed with a guy, keep your mouth shut. But she didn't, did she? 3 good friends and her mom. What else do they have? They do have the one series of emails after Greenville in which he talks about her regret and her betrayal. And you will have to decide whether that, quite frankly, in and of itself, is sufficient to convict a woman. But the bottom line is, think about this. She was asked at trial that particular question, what on earth were you regretful for? And without equivocation, you saw her testimony, she answered it, I held his hand. You may say to yourself, come on, you gotta be kidding me. Why would you feel that way? But at the same time, that's what she said instantaneously. And there is no email, there is no document to suggest they got in bed with one another. And if they did have a good roll in the hay, what's she so angry about the next day? Come on, folks. Is that really enough? Is that really, quite frankly, anything? Of course they got Shayna Citron, don't they? She's great. I said something about a TV show. I mean, Shayna's trying out for a TV show, isn't she? The Real Housewives of Atlanta. I mean, you gotta be kidding me. You see her outfit the second day? The red dress? You saw the video of her interview with Andy Thompson way back in January of 2010. Glasses, dark clothes, nothing flamboyant, nothing dramatic. But then she wanders into court, she looks at the camera and says, "Showtime!" Andrea checked out of her marriage. I lay on the sofa and looked at the ceiling. Oh, she was wailing. Honest to goodness, listen to that crap. And then, the next day she comes back and she's looking for another opportunity to wail yet again, but there ain't the opportunity to do so. By God, she doesn't let the opportunity pass, does she? No, I had to swim to the boat to get a life jacket. What? Why on earth are you screeching about that? But the damnedest thing about Shayna Citron is her own testimony is, Andrea never told me she was having an affair. I knew, not because of anything Andrea said. In fact, Andrea told me over and over and over again, I'm not leaving my husband, I'm not leaving my kids. I knew because Look at your eyes when you get in the jury room, folks. When she talked about Rusty, they were cold and hard. But when she talked about her boss, they sparkled. That's the quality of the evidence that the state of Georgia is bringing you in this case. Absolutely nothing that Shana Citron says is worthy of belief. They got Melanie White. What does Melanie White have to say? Melanie White says, I don't know Andrea Sneiderman, but I talked to Hemi Newman, as you would, of course, with your realtor. I mean, he's her realtor. I'm going to tell somebody the intimate details of my life. Geez, who can I tell? I'm having an affair, so I can't really tell my wife. I'll go on to my next best choice. Gosh, my realtor. And lo and behold, according to Melanie White, Hemi Newman makes these admissions about some sort of fantasy relationship he has had with Andrea Sneiderman. Think about Melanie White's testimony for a second. You have got her in her original statement saying, he told me about a trip to London in September, to Greenville in October. That was the sequence she gave when she was interviewed by Mark Potter back in March of 2011. Make no mistake, that's what she said. Now, Hemi Newman is apparently telling her all about the intimate details of his life. Does he tell her anything about a trip to Longmont, Colorado? Absolutely nothing whatsoever. What he is apparently telling Melanie White is that it wasn't until sometime well after that, originally in October of 2011, before Andrea Sneiderman finally gave in. We can presume that means she agreed to have sex with him. We do not know. But think about the chronology. The state would have you believe they were sleeping together in Longmont, but it wasn't until October before she finally gave in. What else? Remarkably enough, when she is interviewed in March of 2011, she does not bring up the subject of their being together in London and Andrea Sneiderman, after cuddling, after doing whatever, getting up and going to the bathroom to quote-unquote finish herself off. Seems like that might be a detail you would recall. She's interviewed at that time. She says nothing about it. But lo and behold, she walks into court. It's showtime. And we hear it from her. Are you going to rely on that, ladies and gentlemen? There was some interesting banter back and forth between the attorneys and Mr. Broom today concerning phone communications between Melanie White and Hemi Newman. Because remember what Melanie White said. On the evening in question, before Andrea Sneiderman gave in, they spoke on the phone. And he said, what should I do? We've gone off, sat by a pond, fed the ducks, whatever, had dinner. We've come back to our room, and now here we are. What should I do? One of you has written down Melanie White's phone number. If you have it, it's 404-915-9624. You got 2 trips to Greenville, one on the 26th and 27th of August, and one on the 21st and 22nd of October. Under the state's logic, that conversation had to have happened on either the evening of the 26th or the evening of the 21st, August, October, respectively. You'll have the records. Hemi Newman's phone records are right here. Binder number 2, dates exhibit number 70. You will have them with you, and there is nothing to prevent you from looking at it. Take a look and see if there is anything in those records to support what she says that such a phone conversation took place. It ain't there, folks. It simply ain't there. What else do they have? Do they have anything else in support of a romantic involvement? They've got Longmont. Of course. They've got the hotel records. We've got them. The hotel records are a joke. You heard Brady Blackburn, kind of a smart ass to be honest with you, but fairly engaging guy. He was delighted to have the opportunity to say what WFT said on TV, but he talked about, yeah, at some point, the reservations for the room that Andrea Sneiderman were in were for 2 people. That would have been from the 18th until the 20th. And then from the 21st to the 23rd, the reservations were for 1 person. The other records that were introduced by the defense simply showed that during the entirety of the period, there was only 1 person in a queen-size room. Think about this for a second. We know from the woman from Frontier Airlines, Miss Wysocki, I believe was her name, that Hemi Newman flew out on the 21st, flew back on the 23rd. 2 people in the room under the best possible scenario for the state's theory, not during the not during the period when Hemi Newman is there. The records mean nothing. The records show nothing. They brought the phone guy to say, look, they were both at the Denver airport. Look, they were both at the Atlanta airport. Look, they were both in Longmont, Colorado. Why bother? You saw the woman's testimony. Yeah, they were there. Is that proof of a romantic relationship? Come on, seriously. That's what they got. Do you have any express admission from that woman of a romantic relationship? None. And then you got Hemi Newman's interview itself. Hemi, tell us about your relationship with Andrea. I like her. I would love to have a relationship with her, but I can't. I'm her boss at GE. But if I were to ever leave my job, I have told her I would really like to have a relationship with her. And she has told me, ain't gonna happen. She has drawn her boundaries. She has set things straight. The district attorney will rely on the words of Hemi Newman when they are filtered through Melanie White. Remember, it's showtime. But when it comes to the actual interview of Hemi Newman himself, when he's being interviewed as to this very topic, they will ask you to disbelieve him because it is consistent with the defense in this case. And if it's consistent with what Andrea Sneiderman says, under the state's theory, it can't possibly be true. Same chart, don't need to focus on it. Count 3. Made a false statement in which he said she never suspected Hemi Newman was involved in the murder of her husband prior to December 28th. Where did that come from? I mean, you folks listen to the evidence in this case. Is there any evidence in support of that? Is there anyone to whom Andrea Sneiderman made a statement that has been produced by the state of Georgia supporting that particular allegation? The answer is no, there is not. We know the 28th is important because it is the day that Hemi Newman sent the email with the song attached to Andrea Sneiderman. And we know that is the time when Andrea Sneiderman thought, oh my goodness gracious, what on earth is going on? But is there any evidence to support this particular allegation? I'm not even going to bother to dwell on it. The answer is no. Count 4. Interesting. Here we go. Second part of the case that's important. Knowingly and willfully made a false statement that she did not know that her husband had been shot prior to her arrival at Dunwoody Prep. That's why Don Sneiderman testified. Okay? You saw Mr. Sneiderman testify. His son is a victim. He is a victim. There is no doubt. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, when you are analyzing the validity of what he has said, you have to collectively argue and agree amongst yourselves that what he said is not sufficient to support any sort of conviction whatsoever. 47-second phone call takes place on November the 18th. Don Sneiderman, shortly thereafter, calls Dunwoody Prep. During the course of that conversation, he talks to Jane Newman. You have heard from Jane Newman. Jane Newman recalls the conversation. She was not happy about it because she had to tell an individual that his son had been shot. Don Sneiderman calls. Lo and behold, what's happened to my son? There's been an accident. What kind of accident? He was shot. He was shot! He is expressing surprise at that time. We know he has already tried to call Rusty, according to Rusty's phone records. We know that at the time when he, according to his own testimony, actually made or got that phone call from Andrea on the morning of the 18th, that he was at home with his wife, Marilyn. We know that he doesn't bother to tell anybody about this for 6 months and 7 days. We know he talks to the cops on the 19th. We know he talks to the cops on the 23rd of November. We know he is in communication with the district attorney's office in January of 2011. We know that he and his wife literally come down here from Ohio sometime prior to his actually making that statement. We know that he has no idea when it was that his son and Andrea met. He was off by 9 years. We know that he has no idea when his son and Andrea actually got married. We know that he is an extraordinary moment the other day when all of a sudden he just got, angry. Didn't like the tone of the question. I don't think the tone of the question, didn't like the nature of the questions, and I'm not staying here. And then he realized, can't do that. But I mean, is that really enough? Is there really anything to support what he's saying? I mean, think about this. Here's his version of events. Lo and behold, I get this communication. I know my son has been shot. I don't bother to tell my other son for at least 40 to 50 minutes, despite the fact that I know he's on a plane going from Cleveland to Chicago and from Chicago to Hawaii. You heard his testimony. I didn't know if it was serious. He could have just shot himself in the toenail, shot himself in the finger. But then you heard him say a little while later, lo and behold, I was told that his pulse was weak. Was it a stressful time for him? Of course it was. Does he have a crystal clear memory of what transpired? Of course he does not. Does anyone have a crystal clear recollection of what transpired on that particular day? Of course they do not. But think about this when you're considering this count in the next, which is essentially repeating the same thing. According to him, he's at home with his wife when they get the news from Andrea that their son has been shot. Somebody could corroborate him, couldn't they? Somebody who was in this courtroom, couldn't they? Marilyn Sneiderman, his wife, identified by Bonnie Greenberg during the course of the testimony, was sitting here in this courtroom. She could have gotten up on the witness stand and says, that's exactly what my husband told me. She did. What does that tell you, please? Next thing. Same thing. Different way of phrasing it, same thing. No need to discuss it. Again, romantic involvement. We've already talked about that at length, but let me give you one more point. And it's pretty good. Deputy Chief Sides. He is interviewing Andrea on January the 5th, and he says, Andrea, here's how we're going to do this. We've been out talking to the folks at GE today. What is it that you think they're going to tell us? And then you hear Andrea's response. Okay, are you folks wondering, gosh, what is it that the folks in GE told them? I mean, think about this. There is an email that was introduced by us at or about the time of Rusty's death from Hemi Newman to a number of folks. You will have it with you, and you will see the attachment to who it goes to. It is a wide variety of people at General Electric. You can presume, based on the fact that it is referencing that the funeral will take place and that Shiva will take place, that these are people who know Andrea Sneiderman and know Hemi Newman. Have you heard from a single one of them in the course of this trial about the course of the romantic relationship between Andrea Sneiderman and Hemi Newman? This is a workplace affair, if you believe the state. Is there a single person from that workplace who will back this up? The answer is no. Now, the state has the burden. If they got something, they've been interviewed, if there's something to present in support of their allegations, you would have heard it. You didn't. You can infer rationally from that fact that there's nothing There. You got some emails, and you got not much else. This is a good one, my goodness gracious. A perjury count that none of Hemi Newman's feelings for her were ever returned. Imagine hypothetically a jury being asked to resolve a similar question to this one, and the jurors going home after having rendered a verdict of guilty and their spouse asking them, "So, what was the case about?" "We had to decide if someone's feelings were returned." And we did, in fact, found a defendant guilty. And then the significant other goes, "Well, could you tell me what feelings we're talking about?" I mean, seriously, folks, what feelings are we talking about? Is it there in the indictment? Feelings. Feelings of affection, feelings of humor, feelings of love, feelings of anger, you name it. It covers the whole spectrum of human emotion in this particular indictment. This charge, who's full and who is a joke. This is not worthy of your consideration. Feelings. Are they really that desperate to try to convict Andrea Sneiderman of something that they can't come up with a better charge than this? Feelings? If I could sing, I would break out into the song from the 70 Feelings, but I'm not going to do that because I can't sing. Boy, can I not sing. But the bottom line, folks, that's a joke. You know it. Count it. She told Dunwoody Police that she made it clear to Hemi Newman that she did not want him to pursue her romantically. Assume the worst. Assume that in August of 2010, she and Hemi Newman fell into bed with one another, and then she got up the next day and was really, really, really not happy. Isn't that email that she sent pretty much telling the guy, "Leave me alone"? Haven't you heard during the course of this trial actual emails saying, "Leave me alone, I am angry at you, I don't know how we can continue to even have a friendship"? Is that not telling someone that you don't want them to pursue you romantically? I mean, seriously, what is the basis for that charge? It is contradicted by their own evidence. And let me go back to the damning set of emails where Andrea, quote-unquote damning set of emails, where Andrea allegedly says, "I have betrayed, regret, whatever." Smack dab in the middle of it, what is it that Hemi Newman says? "That evening, I got to know the mature mother, Andrea." You've fallen into bed with somebody, you had too much to drink, you're waking up the next morning, you're going, "Ooh, what did I do?" And all your lover can tell you is, "I really want to thank you, because that night I got to know the mature mother, Andrea." It's in there, folks. That's what Hemi Newman said. It's in there. Does that really support an inference of a romantic relationship or involvement? Count 9. She says she didn't share a hotel room with Hemi Newman. We've already talked about that, folks. There is no documentation from the hotel. There is no one from the hotel who can testify that they were in fact together. The state is asking you to infer that because nobody could find a record for Hemi Newman, because the records apparently do not exist if investigated at this period of time, that they must have spent the night together. But again, nothing is ever said to Melanie White about this. If they're sharing a room, why is it that the subject of Hemi Newman telling Melanie White that she finally gave in only comes around in October when this took place in July? It's not even close. They had a chance to prove it. They presented hotel documentation. That hotel documentation backfired on him. It is a 0. This is a good one. Denied to Dunwoody Police that Hemi Newman was in Longmont, Colorado in 2010. And that Hemi Newman was with him. First off, remember the conversation. Sides asked her, "Was he there?" In Denver. And she goes, "I don't think so. Wait a second. Let me get back to me on that." He never gets back. Actually, it was Barnes who asked that question. But they charged him. The word Longmont is never said. This is a false statement count. Words matter in a false statement count. They charged that he was never in Longmont, Colorado. The subject was asked, was he in Denver? There was the response from Andrea Sneiderman, the words Longmont were never uttered. Under those circumstances, and again, it matters when you're talking about words in a false statement count, they didn't ask the right question. Or maybe they did ask the right question. The DA blew it when they drew it up. They didn't bother to listen to the interview. Who knows? Bottom line is, what they've alleged is not what she said. Not even close. One more document of a chart. Okay. She committed perjury because she said that she believed he was there on GE business and that such statement would have been material to Hemi Newman's murder trial. You know, imagine that jury. They're deliberating amongst themselves and they're going, is Hemi Newman insane? Is Hemi Newman guilty but mentally ill? Or is Hemi Newman simply guilty? You know? The one thing that's keeping me from finding him guilty, out and out guilty, is whether or not he was in Longmont, Colorado on GE business as opposed to some other kind of business. Perjury requires that it be material to the issue of the trial in question. First off, it's not. And secondly, why on earth would it be important for Andrea Sneiderman, and you saw her answer, to recall whether Hemi Newman had told her he was in town on GE business or regular business? Is that something she would have necessarily recalled because you have to knowingly and willfully make a false statement? She's testifying in February 2012 about something that happened in July of 2010. Under those circumstances, are you really going to find that woman guilty of a crime on that matter, which is not just somewhat peripheral, but totally and completely peripheral to any issue in Hemi Newman's trial? Again, that's a sign of how desperate they are to convict a woman of something. Count 12. They didn't kiss while in Greenville. Perjury requires cooperation. There is no cooperation. We have a waitress 4.5 months later who says, yeah, they kissed. We have no one else to say they kissed. We have no video footage of them kissing. And we have the waitress basically saying during the course of this incident, it was pretty obvious to me that he was a lot more into her than she was into him. Sound like anybody we know? Hemi Newman and Andrea Sneiderman? She ain't leaving her kids. She ain't leaving her family. She's basically telling him to buzz off, and he is not letting up. Any cooperation? Absolutely none. But I mean, the bottom line is, this is why we're here. Did she kiss a guy at a bar in October of 2010? I mean, who's fooling who? When you get down to it, that's what they got. That's their blockbuster charge. Seriously. And then this last charge, which is she didn't bother to tell the police about her suspicion of Hemi Newman because she was concerned for her mom's safety. You heard from her mom. You heard from Joanne Powers today. And you know she went to the police on January the 4th and said, what are you guys doing about Hemi Newman? Seriously. That's what they got. Okay. Now I think about 5 minutes left. 13 counts. Hard to talk about 13 counts in the space of an hour and then sit down and go, because I don't get to talking. You're probably thinking to yourself, good riddance for that. But Mr. James will have a chance to talk, and then you will listen to what he has to say, and then ultimately make a decision as to the fate of Mrs. Sneiderman. But let me leave you with this thought. She sits in this courtroom here today as a criminal defendant. She is a victim. On October 18th of 2010, this woman's husband, and you have heard the people talk about the nature of her relationship with her husband. You have heard about person after person after person. And I think there is an exhibit, and I will show it if I can. Is it over there? Meredith. I got it. I'm not going to, my time's running short, folks, so I'm going to be short. But I mean, there you got Shayna Citron, Andrea is checked out. I'll hold it up. And then you got these folks on the other side who testified about the strength of her marriage to Rusty Sneiderman and how much in love they were and how compatible they were. After a while, you might have been thinking, why do we need to hear more and more of it? But it is a wide variety of people. It is her nannies, it is her babysitter, it is her friends from the lake, it is her best friends balanced against this woman right here. Did she have a good relationship with her husband? Damn right she did. Bottom line, folks, she is a victim. Her kids are victims because of something Hemi Newman did. Hemi Newman had an obsession with this woman, had an infatuation with this woman, and he acted on that on the morning of November the 18th of 2010. And as a result of that, the reason he did was because he knew Andrea Sneiderman wasn't going to leave her kids, wasn't going to leave her husband, and the only way he had a shot in his mind was to kill Rusty Sneiderman. She is a victim, make no mistake. And when that happened on that day, part of that woman's heart and part of that woman's soul was ripped away from her by Hemi Newman, and she will never, no matter what happens in this case, never get that back. The state of Georgia is doing its damnedest to take away the rest of her heart and the rest of her soul. Do not let them do that. Send her home to her kids. She did not commit a crime. She should not be here. She should not be a defendant. She is a victim. Find her, pure and simple, folks. The only verdict possible. Acquit her. Find her not guilty on every one of the 13 counts. I thank you for your attention.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, at this point in time, I'm going to allow you to have, with the assistance of Deputy Garrett, I'm going to allow you to have a stretch break in the jury room. And then when we come back, you will hear closing arguments from the state. And after that, I will give you the law that applies to this case. Have a seat for a second. And then after that, I will give you the law that applies to this case, and you will start your deliberation. At that, I need you to continue to have an open mind, listen to the arguments from the lawyers, and I will provide you the law in 10 minutes. Deputy Garrett, 10 minutes. All right.
11 Alive's coverage, continuing coverage of the trial of Andrea Sneiderman as you take a look at her inside the courtroom.